Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Slavic-Eurasian Research Center's seminar for Survival Strategic Research. My name is Akihiro Iwashita. Today I serve as moderator. Today, our seminar's title, Central Asia and Southeast Asia, Exploring the Dynamics of the Greater Engagement. Usually, we rarely discussed both different areas in one combination, Central and Southeast, even Asia, on the same terms. Today's lecturer is a special guest from Thailand, Dr. Paradorn Rangsimaporn, Minister-Counsellor, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Thailand. He got PhD at St. Anthony's College, University of Oxford, but more important thing that he is our SRC's alumni. He went to us twice in 2005 and 2008. So factually 14 years, we do not see him well, but today he's back. Dr. Paradorn, welcome back.
Thank you very much, Professor Iwashita.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you? Sensei?
Good, good. Here it's very snowy, and also today is a minus 4, 5, 6. Now you are in a warmer place?
Yes, it's but it's a bit cool today, around 20, 25, cooler than usual for Thailand.
Okay. Dr. Paradorn is an academic, but also he's now in diplomat in service. So I am very struck with your book. Today you have a presentation in the contents. You quote so many sources with probably confidential chat with diplomats on the site in Central Asia. So today we are very happy to hear you. And before starting your presentation, let me introduce today we have two distinguished commentators. First, Uyama-san, please show your face. Professor Uyama, just next door to me, but he's a great Central Asian researcher. So I'm very excited what Uyama-san comments on Southeast Asian relations. Uyama-san, hello.
Hello. Yes, I will be happy to comment on your paper.
Thank you so much, Uyama-san.
Okay, one more is the kind of a bit far, but within Japan. Dr. Kato Mihoko, please. Dr. Kato is a researcher on Russian foreign policy, but she also covers Southeast Asian and Eurasian relations. Dr. Kato, how are you?
Hi, thank you for inviting me to this event.
Hello, Dr. Kato. Good to see you again.
Oh, okay, then we start the Dr. Paradorn's presentation. The 40 minutes for Dr. Paradorn and 10 minutes each commentators. So please, Paradorn-san, your time.
Okay, thank you so much. Can the first slide, please? So firstly, I would like to thank the Slavic-Eurasian Research Center at Hokkaido, particularly Professor Akihiro Iwashita, for kindly giving me this opportunity to present my recently published book, the title Central Asia and Southeast Asia, Exploring the Dynamics of Greater Engagement. And Professor Iwashita asked me to introduce myself a bit. I'm a Thai diplomat, but I'm also an independent researcher. I did some research before I did a PhD on Russian foreign policy towards Asia, East Asia, including Northeast Asia and Southeast Asia. And I was recently posted in the Thai embassy in Kazakhstan, in Astana, and then Nur-Sultan, then now it's Astana again. But I was there for 3.5 years in Kazakhstan as a diplomat, and I used my time there, especially during the COVID period, when there was not many delegations or much work. We had to work from home usually, often. And so I used my time to do some independent research and to write some articles, and now this book, which I'm presenting today. And but I must stress that the views expressed today are in my book and in my presentation today is my own personal views, and are not that of the Royal Thai government or the Thai Foreign Ministry. Next slide, please. So relations between Central Asia and Southeast Asia, as Professor Iwashita mentioned earlier, has so far been a very neglected research topic. And this is despite the fact that the two regions are rising in global importance and having potential greater connectedness and engagement through China's Belt and Road Initiative. The ASEAN, or the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, is a very large growing market with a population of nearly 656 million people, with a combined GDP of $3,166 billion in 2020, and with a steady GDP growth of around 5% per year. And this is all before the COVID-19 pandemic, of course. ASEAN is also evolving into a regional community, has played a leading role in Asia-Pacific regionalism, and also in the construction of the regional order. Through establishments of dialogue mechanisms such as the AIF, the ASEAN Regional Forum, APEC, which Thailand hosted this year recently, and the East Asia Summit. But in recent years, of course, ASEAN's centrality, significance, and relevance has been increasingly challenged by intensifying US-China rivalry and the military coup in Myanmar, and the recent conflict between Russia and Ukraine. So while Central Asia, on the other hand, has not yet formed a regional institution that comprises only the 5 Central Asian states, there has been recently greater momentum and prospects towards greater regional cooperation and regionalism in recent years. And this has also been challenged, but this has also been challenged by ongoing border tensions between Tajikistan and the Kyrgyz Republic. Central Asia is located at the heart of Eurasia. It possesses vast energy and natural resources. The region has long been strategically important for the great powers. It has a combined population of about 75 million and a combined GDP of about nearly 300 billion in 2020. It also represents a relatively large untapped market, including for ASEAN countries. And likewise, Central Asian countries also see ASEAN as a potentially large market for their goods and as an alternative investor and economic partner. And enhanced relations with ASEAN could also help facilitate Central Asian states' integration into the dynamically growing Asia-Pacific region. There's been growing momentum towards greater economic engagement between the two regions, not only through China's Belt and Road Initiative, but also Russia's Eurasian Economic Union. And both regions also share geopolitical similarities. They consist of small and medium states that have to deal with great power dynamics and rivalry, including shared concerns over China's increasing dominance in their respective regions. And while regionalism in Southeast Asia has been a relative success story, and an ASEAN community is steadily forming, Central Asian regionalism has only recently gained momentum, as I mentioned earlier. And due to Central Asia sharing the above-mentioned geopolitical similarities with Southeast Asia, the Central Asian states could also learn from the ASEAN experience, and this could be another area for further engagement between the two regions. Next slide, please. So my book aims to fill in this research gap by looking at the nature and dynamics of relations between the two regions, and it focuses on the driving factors of greater engagement between them, namely the aims and attempts of Central Asian states to diversify the relations as part of their hedging strategy. It firstly looks at how Southeast Asia, or ASEAN, is viewed by Central Asian countries, how the region fits in the Central Asian countries' mostly multi-vector foreign policies, what has been their engagement with the region and ASEAN so far. Secondly, it analyzes the key drivers of the greater engagement, firstly through increasing mutual interest in developing relations between the EAU and ASEAN. Secondly, growing interest in utilizing China's Belt and Road Initiative to connect the two regions to better access each other's markets, as well as to use Central Asia as a land bridge to the European market for Southeast Asian goods. And thirdly, Central Asian countries' growing concern over the expansion of Chinese economic influence, which could provide further impetus for enhanced relations with ASEAN and some of its member countries as alternative partners and counterweight to China. The third point, it looks at third aim is to look at Central Asian views of ASEAN as a potential model for Central Asian regionalism, and how the regions have shared principles and challenges as both consist of small and medium states that have to deal with great power rivalry and competition. Primarily the rise of China and the response to this of other regional powers. And lastly, it aims to look at the prospects for greater Central Asia, Southeast Asian engagement and provide some recommendations for strengthening this, as well as some reflections on the challenges in the future. Next slide, please. So my research utilizes the foreign policy analysis literature of small and medium states, particularly the foreign policy strategy of hedging by ASEAN countries. I argue that ASEAN and some of its key member countries are seen as viable alternative partners for Central Asian states, particularly in the economic field. And the Central Asian states' views and policies towards ASEAN and Southeast Asian countries are part of this hedging strategy in order to diversify those foreign relations and economic partners as much as possible in order to avoid over-dependence on one particular power, namely Russia and China. And this is particularly the case at a time when the America's focus on and influence in Central Asia is fading after fully withdrawing from Afghanistan in August last year. But I'm not saying that the Southeast Asian countries present the most important alternative partner of Central Asia. They are only one among several alternative partners, such as the European Union and its member states, Japan, India, South Korea, and also some Middle Eastern countries. So all these countries fit in within the Central Asian states broadly multi-vector foreign policies. And somewhat paradoxically, two of the driving factors of greater engagement between the two regions, the Eurasian Economic Union and the Belt and Road, are projects led by the very regional powers, Russia and China, that Central Asian states are trying to avoid over-dependence on by seeking diversification with other partners, including ASEAN. But it is because of these projects and the role Central Asian states play in them to various degrees that have attracted the greater interest of ASEAN and its members to step up the engagement with Central Asia. Now, the academic literature on foreign policy behavior of small and medium states or secondary or tertiary powers, especially the hedging behavior, have utility on the foreign policy behavior of Central Asian and Southeast Asian states, as both regions consist of states that vary from small states like Laos and the Kyrgyz Republic and medium states or secondary powers like Indonesia and Kazakhstan. And both regions, the states in both regions are in asymmetrical relationships with their respective regions' great powers, Russia and China in Central Asia, and China and the US in Southeast Asia. And the foreign policies of countries in Central Asia and Southeast Asia have therefore similar characteristics, but employing different terms. The Central Asian states, along with some other post-Soviet states, pursue a multi-vector foreign policy to varying degrees, while Southeast Asian countries' foreign policies have often been described as omnidirectional or multidirectional. But in aim and practice, they're essentially the same, as they seek to diversify the foreign relations to secure as many security, political, and economic benefits as they can. And they also seek to enhance and maximize the bargaining position while minimizing the potential threats and challenges. And this policy enables successful implementation of a hedging strategy, neither balancing nor bandwagoning, which helps preserve the autonomy and creates a stable environment for the economic development in an increasingly multipolar world. So my analytical framework draws upon the utility of three concepts, which are omnidirectional hedging, economic hedging, and hedging regionalism. And I will go through each. And this is mostly borrowed from this, the literature on foreign policy analysis of Southeast Asian states, except for the last one, hedging regionalism, which I borrowed from work by an Italian scholar who's based in the UK on the balancing regionalism. Next slide, please. So firstly, omnidirectional hedging involves the diversification of economic, diplomatic, and security relations with other secondary and third powers, and not just the region's great powers. And this is in order to enhance the regional state's strategic space and sovereignty in the regional system and to ease the tension in the regional strategic environment. So omnidirectional hedging helps small medium powers to avoid being entrapped in ensuing great power rivalry, in which the more straightforward strategic alignment choices would make them just pawns of that power contest. And in Central Asia, where Russia and China are the dominant regional powers, instead of choosing sides, whether to balance or bandwagon, it can be argued that the Central Asian states have tried to pursue a policy of omnidirectional hedging by diversifying the foreign partners and by attempting to draw them towards greater engagement with the region. And such a policy is also seen as a manifestation of their multi-vector foreign policies, but whether they have been successful or not is beyond the scope of this research. The second is economic hedging. Such behavior includes economic pragmatism with regards to the rising power in order to maximize economic benefits through the forging of direct economic links, and also economic diversification with regards to other powers to minimize economic risks of independence by diversifying economic links. And due to ASEAN's and the member states' limited political security role and influence beyond their region, the hedging utility for Central Asia lies more in the economic area, and where some key Southeast Asian countries are seen as playing a potentially greater role by being alternative trade and investment partners for Central Asian states. And it is argued that the Central Asian states have followed a policy of economic pragmatism with regards to China and Russia by trying to extract the maximum economic benefits through trade and investment and through the export of energy and natural resources, infrastructure, development, and investment from China's Belt and Road, but also regional economic integration and development from the Russian-led Eurasian Economic Union, in which Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan are members, and Uzbekistan is recently an observer. The Central Asian states have at the same time tried to pursue a policy of economic diversification, forging economic links with other actors, including ASEAN and its members. But the means by which the Central Asian states can pursue greater economic engagement with ASEAN and its members are also through the Eurasian Economic Union and the Belt and Road. And the need for economic diversification is also seen in Central Asian concerns regarding expanding Chinese economic influence, which has propelled them to seek alternative economic partners, such as those in ASEAN, to lessen the dependence on China. And the Central Asian states have also pursued the third hedging characteristic is hedging regionalism strategy. And this is namely the use of regional cooperation or regional platforms as a hedging mechanism. So rather than choosing a particular power to balance against or bandwagon with, the Central Asian states, except for Turkmenistan, have joined various regional projects led by both Russia and China, but also trying to form their own exclusive regional cooperation platform as a way to hedge against those powers. And to this end, the success of Southeast Asian regionalism in the form of ASEAN is seen as an attractive model for Central Asian states to emulate and presents a further area for inter-regional engagement. And ASEAN's soft regionalism approach, where its norms and principles that focus on sovereignty, non-interference, and consensus, and its role in managing relations with great powers and other external actors, hold a particular appeal for Central Asian states that cherish their sovereignty and independence, and who seek ways to collectively withstand and manage external influence and pressure. Next slide, please. So I will briefly go through each of my main chapters and also the key findings in each chapter. And so the first main chapter look at Central Asia's relations with Southeast Asia since they became independent in late 1991. It firstly analyzes the multi-vector foreign policy of Central Asian states. Secondly, it looks at the Southeast Asian vector within them. And thirdly, it looks at how some key Southeast Asian countries are seen as political and economic role models for Central Asian leaders, particularly in the initial period of independence. And lastly, it examines Central Asia's engagement with ASEAN and ASEAN-led fora. And the key findings show that the Southeast Asian vector in the multi-vector foreign policies of Central Asian states is largely driven by the need to forge relations with alternative economic partners as part of the Central Asian countries' omnidirectional hedging and economic hedging strategies in order to enhance the strategic space and maneuverability, and by diversifying the foreign partners. And as I mentioned, Southeast Asia countries have limited ability to project political and security influence beyond their region. So the focus has very much been on expanding the economic influence and interest and presence in Central Asia. But trade and investment cooperation has been relatively weak, primarily due to the vast distance and weak transport and logistics links between the two regions. And only Singapore and Malaysia have been successful in making substantive economic inroads in the region. And this is largely due to the Central Asian leaders and elites' admiration of their political and social economic models and their attempts to follow them. And this successful combination of stable semi-authoritarian political rule with advanced economic development resonates very well with Central Asia's own authoritarian rulers, and is a factor for their closer engagement. And the Singaporean and Malaysian leaders have also close personal ties with the Central Asian counterparts, especially in the early years of independence. And this has given added impetus to their relations and provided them with greater socio-economic opportunities in the region. For instance, Malaysia's energy presence through Petronas, and Malaysia has, in this respect, an advantage over other Southeast Asian countries in the region. And Singapore and Malaysia also has some soft power or nation branding in high quality education and human capital development, as well as Malaysia's and Indonesia's shared moderate Muslim identity with Central Asia. And these are additional factors that help drive their relatively strong relations with Central Asia. Central Asia's engagement with ASEAN and ASEAN-led fora is also seen as important for Central Asian states to access the dynamically growing Asia-Pacific economy and to participate and gain from the regional integration processes in order to enhance the strategic space and also to diversify the economic partners. But they have been unsuccessful primarily due to not having enough substantial economic links as required for ASEAN to establish formal dialogue partner relations with. And even in Kazakhstan's case, which has been the most active proponent for greater ties with ASEAN, Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, the two most promising partners for ASEAN, have also explored engagement with ASEAN through other avenues, such as through SICA, the Conference on Interaction and Confidence Building Measures in Asia, which was initiated by former President Nazarbayev, and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. But this relations through these fora remains limited. And there's also been an idea of a C5+1 dialogue with ASEAN, and this has long been floated, but has yet to be picked up and promoted by leaders, particularly from the ASEAN side. Next slide, please. So my next main chapter looks at the key drivers of potential greater engagement. The first is, as I mentioned earlier, is the increasing interest from both the Eurasian Economic Union and ASEAN in developing relations, including the possibility of having a free trade agreement. And some ASEAN member countries, like Vietnam and Singapore, have already concluded FTAs with the Eurasian Economic Union, while others like Indonesia and Thailand have expressed interest. Secondly, Southeast Asian countries have exhibited a growing interest in using China's Belt and Road to connect with Central Asia, to access its market and to use it as transit bridge to the European market. And Central Asian countries themselves have tried to use the road in the Belt and Road as a selling point to attract further interest. Thirdly, there's a growing concern among Central Asian states over the expansion of Chinese economic influence, and they have sought to diversify their foreign relations to lessen dependence on China. And ASEAN, as I said, is seen as one potential alternative economic partner and counterweight. And this could act as a further impetus for stronger relations in the future. Next slide, please. So these key drivers are informed by Central Asian states' economic hedging strategy. which includes policy of economic pragmatism, where they have tried to extract maximum economic benefits from engaging with China's Belt and Road and also Russian-led Eurasian Economic Union, at the same time pursuing a policy of economic diversification, forging economic links with, amongst others, ASEAN and its member states to lessen economic dependence on China and arguably also on Russia. Now, Central Asian states' engagement with the Belt and Road and the Eurasian Economic Union also facilitates their greater economic engagement with ASEAN and its members. But the EAU and the BRI are not mutually exclusive, and Central Asia, Southeast Asia engagement through these platforms can potentially be complementary. And despite Russia's initial concerns regarding China's Belt and Road displacing its own land bridge role, Beijing has managed to convince Moscow that these two projects can be connected and developed in mutual cooperation. And Russia subsequently viewed the Belt and Road as complementary to its greater Eurasian partnership. And during Xi Jinping's visit to Russia in May 2015, there was a joint declaration on cooperation between the two that was signed, and both sides started to explore possibility of linking the two initiatives as the Eurasian Economic Partnership. And Central Asian elites and experts, particularly those in Kazakhstan, are very generally supportive of greater links between the Eurasian Economic Union and Belt and Road, and as well as Kazakhstan's own infrastructure project, the Nulizhou, seeing as a means for Central Asia to become a trade and transport and logistics bridge between Europe and Asia. And this complementarity between the two regional integration projects opens up the opportunity for greater engagement between the two regions. And for Central Asia, it provides the possibility of Southeast Asian countries not only providing an alternative export market and source of investment and technology, but also helping to provide some counterweight to expanding Chinese influence. And actually, Southeast Asian countries are actually in a very good position to understand and share experience with Central Asian countries, because they are both fellow small, medium states. They share the same concerns I have in China as an increasingly dominant and assertive neighbor. And this shared geopolitical position and concern may prove to be another strong impetus for greater engagement. As one former Kyrgyz foreign minister, ambassador to China, once noted, to understand China's relations with Central Asia, one should also study China's relations with Southeast Asia. Next slide, please. So my last main chapter looks at the ASEAN model for Central Asian regionalism, and it examines the attractiveness of the ASEAN model for the burgeoning movement towards greater Central Asian regionalism in terms of enhanced cooperation and coordination, if not yet the actual formation of regional institutions. It firstly traces the history of Central Asian regionalism, demonstrating the failures of the 5 Central Asian states to achieve an exclusive regionalism without the involvement of external powers. Secondly, it looks at how ASEAN is seen as one possible model for such Central Asian regionalism due to the convergence of norms and principles upheld by ASEAN that appeals to Central Asian leaders, such as non-interference in internal affairs and consensus-based decision-making. Furthermore, ASEAN's soft regionalism approach, with a focus on consensus, pragmatism, flexibility, and consultation, is more attractive than European Union's hard regionalism with formal integration and institutionalization. And thirdly, ASEAN's attractiveness also lies in its ability to use ASEAN-led or ASEAN-centered platforms such as the East Asia Summit, the AIF, and ASEAN Plus dialogues to engage and manage relations with several great powers in a way that avoids over-dependence on either of them and to avoid either balancing against or bandwagoning with a particular power in situations of tension short of an outbreak of war between the great powers. And in this respect, ASEAN's appeal for Central Asia is its hedging regionalism, or the use of regional cooperation or platforms as a hedging mechanism vis-a-vis the great powers. But as I mentioned earlier, this has been increasingly put under strain due to recent seismic events and challenges. And the recent renewed momentum towards forging an exclusive Central Asian regionalism, most notably the 4 Central Asian summits held since 2018, has prompted a renewed discussion and exploration of possible regionalism models to follow and learn from. And ASEAN is one such model. I as I mentioned, there's a convergence of its norms and principles of non-interference in the internal affairs and the consensus decision-making with those held in Central Asia, including in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, in which 4 Central Asian countries are members. And ASEAN's soft regionalism approach also holds greater appeal for Central Asian elites who value their sovereignty. The EU's hard institutionalism or hard regionalism is less attractive. The related success of ASEAN's hedging regionalism is also attractive for Central Asian states that are facing similar geostrategic circumstances of being small and medium states in the midst of great power competition and expanding influence. So an ASEAN-style platform of greater regional cooperation and coordination is an attractive model for Central Asians to follow. And the increasing acceptance of C5+1 dialogue platforms by external powers, including Russia and China, bodes well for not only for enhancing regional cooperation, but also for the Central Asian states to use this mechanism to pursue the multi-vector foreign policies and to balance the influence of great powers. And actually, I would argue the Central Asian cooperation and regionalism is complementary to the pursuance of a multi-vector foreign policy, as they are both grounded on flexibility, pragmatism, and informality in order to ensure that no single great power dominates the region. And the Central Asian states can even build upon the C5+1 dialogue platforms with various powers by expanding it to C5+2 or 3, etc., which is similar to the ASEAN+3 platform that ASEAN uses to engage with China, Japan, and South Korea. And this can be later expanded to a forum similar to that of the East Asia Summit. But it should be noted that discussions on the ASEAN model has mostly been held at the expert level, and none of the Central Asian governments have contacted the ASEAN Secretariat regarding this issue. Nonetheless, the trend towards a new Central Asian regionalism, where the region's countries jointly work together independent from outside influence, appears promising and gaining strength. The region's 2 leading players, Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, have both championed this process and expressed political will. President Tokayev, for example, as an architect of Kazakhstan's multi-vector foreign policy of balancing the great powers through, balancing the great powers through positive relations that was followed to varying degrees by other Central Asian states, well understands that it would be far easier for Central Asian states to achieve such a balance through coordination and cooperation with one another, rather than by acting alone. And the ASEAN experience of developing dialogues as a unit with other powers is therefore useful for Central Asia in demonstrating that regional states with primary loyalty to each other first can then jointly develop fruitful relations with external powers. ASEAN too should encourage and support such greater Central Asian cooperation and regionalism, as it would mean a larger market for their goods, as well as help ensure regional security and prosperity. Next slide, please. So I would go through my conclusions and recommendations and reflections. And so my first main conclusion is that Central Asian countries have tried to pursue multi-vector foreign policies to various degrees and success. The aim is to diversify the external partners to lessen or avoid over-dependence on one particular power, as well as to enhance their strategic space and flexibility. And the countries of Central Asia and Southeast Asia have increasingly recognized the growing importance of each other's respective regions in terms of being both potentially large and relatively untapped markets for their goods and economic cooperation. Both sides have therefore stepped up their engagement and began to explore avenues for further cooperation. And the Southeast Asian vector is seen as part of this omnidirectional hedging and economic hedging strategy of the Central Asian states. Leading Southeast Asian economies such as Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, and Vietnam are viewed as seen as attractive alternative economic partners for Central Asia. But the vast physical distance between the 2 regions and weak transport and logistics links have been the main obstacles to more significant trade and economic ties, as well as a poor business and investment climate and relatively small markets, especially in Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Turkmenistan. And these have presented further obstacles to stronger economic links, despite the recent renewed focus on economic diplomacy by the Central Asian states. Second conclusion is that some Southeast Asian countries, particularly Singapore and Malaysia, are seen as alternative social, economic, and political models for the Central Asian states to emulate, particularly in the early years of independence. And because of their successful coupling of stable authoritarian political rule with advanced economic development, and this resonates well with Central Asia's authoritarian rulers. The close personal ties between the leaders of Singapore and Malaysia with the Central Asian counterparts have also helped give those countries an edge over the Southeast Asian competitors. And this has provided them with greater socio-economic opportunities in the region and making them the leading Southeast Asian investors and economic partners in Central Asia. Thirdly, Central Asian states, particularly Kazakhstan, also see engagement with ASEAN and ASEAN-led fora as an important entry point to the dynamically growing Asia-Pacific economy. And they aim to participate and benefit from the regional integration processes, which would also help enhance the strategic space and diversify their economic partners. But their formal engagement and interaction with ASEAN remains limited, primarily due to not having enough substantial economic links required for ASEAN to establish formal relations with. But nonetheless, Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, the two most promising partners for ASEAN, have explored engagement with ASEAN through other avenues, as I mentioned before, through SICA and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, but these still remain limited. And the idea of a C5+1 dialogue with ASEAN has also been promoted, and floated around, but yet to be picked up by leaders, particularly from the ASEAN side. Next slide, please. Fourth conclusion is that in recent years, there have been further drivers of greater interregional engagement. Firstly is the ASEAN members' interest in the Eurasian Economic Union and vice versa. Secondly is the interest of Central Asian states to utilize China's Belt and Road to gain access to the Central Asian and European markets. And thirdly, Central Asia's concerns over China's expanding economic influence has forced them to seek out alternative partners. So these key drivers informed by Central Asian states' economic hedging behavior, which includes a policy of economic pragmatism and as well as economic diversification, as I mentioned earlier. The fifth conclusion is that Central Asian states have pursued a hedging regionalism strategy by joining various regional projects led by both Russia and China, but also trying to move towards an exclusive Central Asian regionalism without the inclusion of those powers. And they aim to use such an regionalism as a hedging platform. So ASEAN's success in this respect is seen as a particularly attractive model for Central Asian states to follow and a possible driving factor of greater engagement between the two regions. And as I mentioned earlier, because of the convergence of ASEAN norms and principles of non-interference, as well as consensus-based decision-making, this converge with those norms and principles upheld in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization as well. And also ASEAN's attractiveness lies in its soft regionalism approach, as I mentioned earlier. So next slide, please. Recommendations. So the first is that Central Asian states, for Central Asian states, greater engagement with Southeast Asia and ASEAN could help provide more balance in their foreign relations and some counterweight to Chinese economic influence. The Southeast Asian vector should therefore be given greater weight in the Central Asian states' multi-vector foreign policy, as the Central Asian states are seeking to diversify the export and attract new foreign investors in technology. Key Southeast Asian countries could become such partners, particularly in the fields of agriculture and food processing, the halal industry, digital economy and smart cities, education and training, hospitality and tourism, information and communication technologies, logistics management, and the medical industry. And such greater engagement with Southeast Asia would assist Central Asian states' attempts to pursue a hedging strategy, as well as their own economic development. Second recommendation is that Southeast Asian countries themselves should also step up engagement with Central Asia, as this would mean greater access to the potential benefits arising from Russia's Eurasian Economic Union and China's Belt and Road. The Eurasian Economic Union zone represents a relatively large and untapped market for Southeast Asia, And they can use Kazakhstan, which is the second largest Eurasian Economic Union economy after Russia, as another springboard into the EEAU zone, as well as to other Central Asian markets. Uzbekistan's potential membership of the Eurasian Economic Union would also add about 34 million people to this market. And as the countries of Central Asia lie at the heart of China's New Silk Road, they are the key link for Southeast Asian countries to deliver goods from Asia to Europe faster and potentially cheaper than via the maritime route. Economic ties, which has so far been the weakest link due to transport and logistics problems, may be strengthened through enhanced connectivity between the two components of China's Belt and Road, the land and sea components, as well as between the Belt and Road and the ASEAN's own master plan for connectivity. And other routes, such as those connecting Central Asia with South Asia, should also be explored to provide alternatives to China's East-West route. And before 2022 and Russia's war in Ukraine, the increasing interest of Southeast Asian countries to strengthen relations with the EEAU and to use the BRI to gain access to the Central Asian market and onwards to Europe bode well, was a good sign for the enhancement of economic ties between the two regions. Thirdly, a dialogue mechanism to facilitate greater inter-regional engagement should be established. This would help strengthen cooperation between Central Asia and ASEAN as a regional organization. This could follow the C5+1 dialogue format, which has been well established between the 5 Central Asian states with several powers. And precedence has already been set for such a C5+1 dialogue format between the Central Asian states and regional organizations, such a first meeting was held between the Central Asian states and the Secretariat of the League of Arab States last year. And as I noted earlier, ASEAN itself has similar formats with its dialogue partners. And actually the first C5+1 dialogue with Japan was established in 2004, was based on the ASEAN +3 dialogue platform. So both sides are well familiar with such a dialogue mechanism, and a C5+1 meeting with ASEAN could start at the senior officials level to work on an agenda and test its feasibility, and perhaps later upgrade to the ministerial level and even leaders level. And fourth recommendation is Central Asia and ASEAN should engage with each other more to explore the idea of using ASEAN as a model for Central Asian regionalism. ASEAN has since the Cold War been relatively successful in navigating through the murky waters of great power competition, and they can share their experience and advice on how to engage and manage relations with several external powers. Indeed, the Central Asian states can build upon the C5+1 dialogue platforms with various powers by expanding it to C5+2 or 3, as I mentioned earlier. And this is similar to ASEAN +3 platform. But while Central Asia can learn from the ASEAN experience as a platform for regional states to interact with external powers, ASEAN itself is growing weak due to being too diverse and with too many members. And this is particularly true recently with ASEAN centrality and unity being increasingly challenged by the growing US-China rivalry, the deteriorating security situation in Myanmar, and the Russia-Ukraine conflict. So some reflections, brief reflections on the future. Firstly, the challenge of weak transport and logistics links between the two regions remain despite China's Belt and Road. The vast majority of trade between Europe and Asia remains by sea and not by rail because it's more economically competitive, but though taking longer. Moreover, hard infrastructure such as roads and railways by itself is not enough. Central Asian governments should also focus on building soft infrastructure, particularly an enabling environment for investment and trade, such as through favorable tax regimes and incentives. And this would help build confidence among Southeast Asian investors and businesses to engage more with Central Asia. The second reflection is that apart from the vast physical distance and weak connectivity links, there's also a vast cultural gap between the two regions. More than 100 years of Russian and Soviet domination of Central Asia has separated Central Asia from Asia in so many ways. And these barriers have yet to be fully overcome. As one Central Asian expert told me, Central Asia is still neither Central nor Asia. It is still a post-Soviet periphery. And to overcome these cultural differences and mutual lack of knowledge, people-to-people relations and social, cultural, and educational cooperation should be enhanced. And Southeast Asian soft power diplomacy in Central Asia through cultural events and exchanges should be actively promoted, and vice versa. And tourism both ways has great potential, and it could be expanded through visa-free regimes and direct flights. And this would all facilitate people-to-people relations and greater mutual understanding, interest, and trust. Third reflection is that both regions are facing greater geostrategic uncertainty than ever before since the end of the Cold War. And this may severely undermine the driving factors of greater engagement that I put forward in my book. Russia's war with Ukraine has shaken the foundations of European security and world order, with serious repercussions far and wide in both Central Asia and Southeast Asia. The strongest ever Western sanctions on Russia has without doubt negatively affected the economies of Central Asia, who are intrinsically linked with the Russian economy. The future of the Eurasian Economic Union is also in doubt, as Russia, the largest economy, is being hit hard by sanctions and increasingly isolated economically and politically. And the Central Asian states themselves are scrambling to limit the damage and to effectively weather this storm, particularly in light of the strong economic links to Russia, as well as to the economic problems they're already facing from the COVID-19 pandemic. And politically, the Central Asian states have to walk a diplomatic tightrope, refraining from statements that appear to support Russia or to criticize it. It is highly likely that Russia would continue to apply pressure on the Central Asian states to support its position. Kazakhstan is the most obvious target given its large economy, as well as President Tokayev's being seen as beholden to Putin for sending Russian-led CSTO peacekeepers to help shore up his power amidst the political unrest early this year. For instance, Kazakhstan is looking for alternative routes to supply its oil to Europe instead of through the Caspian Pipeline Consortium, which goes through Russia to Novorossiysk on Russia's Black Sea coast. And this followed Russia's interruption of Kazakh oil supplies 4 times. And this was seen as a Kremlin's punishment of Kazakhstan for not publicly supporting Russia. And indeed, Tokayev publicly told Putin at the SPIEF at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum this June that Kazakhstan will not recognize the separatist republics of Donetsk and Lugansk. And it also refuses to recognize a recent referendum in Russian-controlled Ukrainian territories. Seeing Russia's increasing weakness, China is also likely to step up its economic and political presence in the region, although its Belt and Road Initiative project and economy are also negatively affected by the Russia-Ukraine conflict and from its earlier zero-COVID policy. So given such pressure and potential threats from both powers, it is even more imperative for Central Asian states to try to hedge as much as they can and to reach out to other external powers amidst rapidly shrinking strategic space. And for my last reflection, for Southeast Asia, the region was already being torn apart by the intensifying US-China rivalry, as well as the divided and lackluster response to the 2021 Myanmar military coup. And the lack of ASEAN unity was already undermining ASEAN centrality, and hedging was increasingly seen as a luxury that ASEAN states cannot afford for long. And the Russian-Ukraine conflict led to a characteristically bland response from ASEAN that had to adopt to a lowest common denominator position that best reflected the different views held by member states. The war has also negatively affected Southeast Asia's economy due to rising oil and food prices and disrupted the global supply chain. And these impacts on the global economy will undoubtedly limit or even reduce Central Asia, Southeast Asia trade and economic ties even more. Russia's economic decline would likely undermine the Eurasian Economic Union's attractiveness for ASEAN countries and lessen their interest in concluding free trade agreements. ASEAN countries' interest in Central Asia might likely subsequently decrease as well. And Putin's hope for Russia's turn to the East and greater Eurasian partnership initiatives to better connect and engage with Asia, including with ASEAN, are likely to be undermined as well, with Russia becoming ever more dependent on China in Asia. Even China has maintained a careful position not supporting Russia and repeatedly abstaining in UNSC and UNGA votes on Ukraine. And it remains unclear where Russia's fate lies as it is increasingly isolated from Europe and some parts of Asia as well. So Russia's fate will undoubtedly affect Eurasia's fate. as well as the prospects for greater Central Asia, Southeast Asia engagement for the foreseeable future. Next slide, please. So thank you very much. This is my email. If there's any questions or comments, I'm happy to receive them here today at this seminar or by email later. And this is a cover of my book, and you can purchase it from the publishers, Palgrave Macmillan website or from Amazon. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Paradorn-san. A bit longer than expected, but
yes,
your last sentences, your last reflections, the most important part for us. It's very fresh and interesting. So I immediately open the floor to the two commentators. So Uyama-san, please.
Thank you, Dr. Paradorn Rangsimaporn. I very much enjoyed reading your book and hearing your presentation. ASEAN or Southeast Asian countries indeed have very good potentials to cooperate with Central Asia. But Central Asian countries are accustomed to be objects of attention of outside countries, and the level of their demand is quite high. So you have to demonstrate the strong points or advantage of ASEAN or Southeast Asian countries in relation to Central Asia. Japan has always been criticized for not making substantial investment in Central Asian countries. Japanese businesses are risk averse, and I noted with great interest that you mentioned that Southeast Asian businesses are also risk averse. So in addition to geographic distance, this risk averseness of businesses seem to be common problems of Southeast Asia and Japan. But still, Japan has its strong points. It is one of the top donors in economic, humanitarian, and technical aid. JICA is very famous throughout Central Asia, and many Central Asian elite members have been trained in Japan. And Japan also has influence on in the financial sphere. It has great influence on the Asian Development Bank. It cooperates with EBRD. So Japan probably not enough, but it has its strong points. So what can be strong points of ASEAN in relation to Central Asia? You pointed out that ASEAN and some of its member countries are models for Central Asian development and regionalism. But to be a model is probably not enough to enhance actual relationship and cooperation. And you also mentioned that Singapore and Malaysia are leading countries in relation to Central Asia. But your country, Thailand, seems to be less active in this regard. So why Thailand is not so active, and what can be strong points of Thailand in relation to Central Asia. And next, you recommended that Greater Central Asia, Southeast Asia engagement should be pursued, including via EAU and BRI. I agree that this is such engagement via EAU and BRI is feasible to some extent, but it contradicts the very purpose of hedging or balancing against great powers. So, and especially the EAU has become a problematic organization. The interests of its member countries have been divided since its start, and especially after the start of this war, this divide has become very serious because Russia and Belarus want to use this organization to form a kind of bloc economy and stand against Western economic sanctions, while other member countries, especially Kazakhstan, don't want to be involved in troubles related to this war and don't want to be objects of secondary economic sanctions. So I think that maybe it may be useful for ASEAN or its member countries to engage with Central Asia together with third countries or third regions. Such countries, the candidates of such countries and regions are quite numerous, I think. Maybe Japan, maybe South Korea, maybe India, or some countries of West Asia, or even it may be useful to cooperate with the EU to engage with Central Asia. So I want to hear your opinion about the possibility of such cooperation with third countries or regions. So these are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Uyama-san. The last question, I also add one moment. So usually Southeast Asian countries very close to South Asia, but your discussion not so much on the South Asia. I think that South Asia, what role the kind of the third party Uyama-san suggests. So Paradorn-san, please answer in 7 minutes.
Thank you very much, Uyama Sensei. Thank you very much for your comments and views, and I completely agree with you. You did rightly say that Japanese businesses are risk-averse in Central Asia. That is my experience too when I talked with my fellow Japanese diplomats there about Japanese investments in the region, and they also mentioned this. For Southeast Asian countries, not all are risk-averse. Thailand is particularly risk-averse. So that is why, to answer your other question, why Thailand is not so active, it's because of our private sector is very much risk-averse, and also the public sector, the government sector is maybe not as interested or focused on the region as we should be. But other countries like Singapore and Malaysia and perhaps Indonesia and Vietnam, of course, they are risk takers, I would say. And particularly Singapore, they do not have an embassy at all in this region, but they're very active there. They have an ambassador based in Singapore, but they have a lot of investments, particularly in the education sphere, in logistics, in IT, in smart cities. They collaborate with the Astana International Financial Center. So Singapore is very, very active, and they know that, you know, their target and their aim, and they go for it. So and the Malaysians, they have the advantage of as I mentioned in my book, the close personal relations between Mahathir and some Central Asian leaders, and this helped pave the way for like big energy companies like Petronas, and Malaysia's Petronas was able to access Turkmenistan and to still remain there. Yes, regarding yeah, you're right about it's not enough as ASEAN as a model for both for regionalism and for socio-economic political role models. But I just wanted to dissect the areas of possible engagement, particularly in terms of the ASEAN model. There's been a lot of talk in the expert circles, but not yet in the government level. And I think this is an area where there can be further engagement. As I mentioned in my book, the norms and principles of ASEAN and also some other regional organizations in Central Asia, they coincide or converge, particularly in terms of, you know, respect for sovereignty, non-interference in internal affairs, and consensus-based decision-making. You're right also in saying that the Eurasian Economic Union is very much divisive at the moment. Even before, it was also it is somewhat of a paradox, and I did mention this in my book that paradoxically the very factors for greater engagement between the two regions is led by the great powers that these Central Asian states wanted to hedge against. But you know, if you look at the economic hedging model, there's 2 points. There's 2 characteristics. One is gaining economic benefits, maximizing economic benefits. So I believe that some Central Asian states who are members or who participated in EAU and also the Belt and Road, they gain the maximum economic benefits. At the same time, the other characteristic of economic hedging is to diversify economically. So they also try to, at the same time, partner up with other external actors, including ASEAN. Third country involvement is particularly, I think, a very good idea. Thailand has done that in our region, in the Greater Mekong sub-region with our neighboring countries. We partner with European Union or some Western countries, and even with Japan, I think, in helping develop our neighboring countries. And we can also do that in Central Asia. And I see Japan as a particularly strong partner in this respect because we share the same aims for the region. And, you know, when I was at the embassy, my colleague who covered, we also have an organization similar to JICA, which is called TICA. So it's Thailand International Cooperation Agency. So we studied, the embassy studied and talked with JICA colleagues about their role in Kyrgyz Republic, for instance. So I think it's an area that we definitely can explore, and it's a good idea, especially in terms of development, because this is in a sense a soft power diplomacy, I would say. And answering Iwashita Sensei's question about South Asia, yes, South Asia is I do touch on it in terms of as an alternative route as opposed to the Belt and Road that goes through Kazakhstan, because in my book, I did mention that there was been some problems for Southeast Asian or Thai exporters or Kazakh importers of Thai products at the Chinese border. The Chinese goods were given priority, and then with the zero COVID policy, you know, there was a big backlog, and so it was very problematic. So we needed to explore other routes to diversify, and this included the South Asia route, of course. But as you know, it goes mainly through Afghanistan or Iran. And so Afghanistan is still very problematic. And through Iran, there's, as you know, also Iran is under Western sanctions. But I think the Iranian route and through the Caspian or through Turkmenistan is also being used by some Southeast Asian countries like Indonesia. And they found a way to what is it, to avoid sanctions or secondary sanctions on Iran. But as I mentioned, you know, Thai businesses are more risk averse than their ASEAN colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you both. So, Kato-san, please, your time.
Okay. Thank you very much for amazing and informative presentation. And first of all, I'd like to say congratulations on the publication of your second monograph. Yeah, and the book you presented today is an attempt to interpret the unexplored relation between Central Asia and Southeast Asia and ASEAN as a creation of proactive interactions through the three analytical concepts such as omnidirectional hedging, economic hedging, and hedging regionalism. Through the analysis of 4 chapters and the insights of your active diplomat, the book succeeds in revealing the Central Asian states as independent sovereign states with a proactive diplomatic vision and politics, rather than as small and medium-sized states passively bouncing between bandwagons and balancing strategy. So, so I'd like to ask some questions from the perspective of Sino-Russian relations and Asian regionalism. My first question is about the impact of the global international order on the regional politics. Okay. According to the author, the book has been written over a few years, two years since 2019. So 2019 is a year in which China and Russia celebrated the 70th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations. And at the Valdai Club in October 2019, Putin expressed the relationship with China as an союзнические отношения, alliance-like relationship, and he mentioned strengthening bilateral military cooperation with China. Yeah. And this book is written on the premise of a unique international situation in which the relationship between China and Russia is the most strengthened in history. And furthermore, both countries deteriorate the relations with the United States at the same time. So in your book, you analyze China's BRI and Russia's Eurasian Economic Union as complementary, not competitive. But in the next decade, the relations between the major powers could change dramatically. Yeah. So China and Russia may distance themselves from each other, and their relationship with the United States remains poor, both poor, or China and Russia will distance themselves and one of them will move closer to the US. So how do you calculate or predict how the relationship between the Central Asian countries and ASEAN countries will change as a result of change in great power relations, particularly relations among China, US, and Russia at the global level? This is my first question. And second question, I'd like to discuss the war in Ukraine and change in Russia's sphere of influence. So the process of Central Asian countries learning from the ASEAN experience is perhaps a hedging strategy, but as well as a process of decolonization from the Russian sphere of influence. So perhaps the war in Ukraine will encourage the Central Asian countries to move in the direction of decolonization by strengthening their economic ties with China, as well as with their surrounding neighbors, like including Southeast Asia countries and let's say South Asia as Professor Iwashita says. So you expressed a negative view about the development of Central Asian countries and Southeast Asian countries after the Ukraine war. But I think now the Central Asian countries try to be a Central Asia sub-region rather than what to say. This may be a process of transforming from post-Soviet space to Central Asia as a sub-region. So what do you think about this point? This is my second question. And the third question is about the ability of Central Asian countries to propose norms and rules in the regional framework. So ASEAN members proposed key concepts such as ASEAN-centered conference diplomacy and non-interference in internal affairs and consensus decision-making system as norms among the countries involved in regional frameworks. But do you see such entrepreneurial spirit of shared norms or rules in the Central Asian countries? In particular, major powers, Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. I asked this point to you because in the case of Shanghai Cooperation Organization, always the members of SCO shared some key concept and norms such as respect of sovereignty or democratization of international relations or territorial integrity. But such, concept or norms always, those concepts were always proposed by major powers such as Russia and China. So how about Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan? Can those major Central Asian countries propose or propose those norms and rules in the regional framework? That's all. Thank you very much.
Okay,
Thank you.
please answer.
Thank you very much, Kato-san. Those very interesting and thought-provoking questions. Yes, I did end in my book on quite a pessimistic note because I was writing that I think maybe in March or I think just after the war started, and so I didn't have yet the chance to see the developments happening in the region afterwards. But I think you're right in saying that how the great power politics unravel, play out in the future would, of course, affect the Central Asian states and how they pursue their foreign policy. And I would say that hedging would become even more imperative, even more important for them. So they would have to make a more effort to pursue a multi-vector foreign policy because I think they're all concerned with what happened in Ukraine and Russia's actions there. And they, in a sense, they cannot entirely escape Russia's influence economically and politically, of course, but they need to hedge their bets. So they need to diversify their relations. And in that respect, Southeast Asia can again be seen as a one potential partner to develop relations with, particularly in the light of the fact that Russia's relations with Southeast Asia still remain, with some countries in Southeast Asia, still remains quite normal. Only Singapore is on the unfriendly list, and it's because they joined the Western sanctions. So in that sense, I think that despite the fact that the key drivers that I identified maybe weakened the Eurasian Economic Union and even the Belt and Road, but I think that even with the Belt and Road, there's now more talk about Central Asia's importance as a middle route instead of going through the northern route through Russia. So, you know, the Belt and Road is in a sense becoming even the land part, at least, is becoming even more important now. So I think that's something that Central Asia and Southeast Asia can again focus on, you know, to engage with each other through. And Eurasian Economic Union is something that, to my view, yes, I think it's become undermined. I think there's a lot of conflicting views towards its future. So, but even despite that, I mean, for instance, Thailand, we still remain interested in having a free trade agreement with the Eurasian Economic Union, and we still see it as a potentially important market or big market. And I think Indonesia is next amongst the Southeast Asian countries who will conclude a free trade agreement with the Eurasian Economic Union. So in the view of Southeast Asian states, we do not actually see that the Eurasian Economic Union is necessarily less important. So we still see some potential there. I think the relationship between Russia and China in the region is going to be interesting and something that we need to follow and monitor. And as in a broader perspective, of course, Russia now is more forced to look towards the east, towards Asia. And even in Asia, it has limited options. China is the main partner. And yeah, as a lot of analysts has said, Russia will increasingly become the junior partner in this relationship with China. ASEAN, as I mentioned, has still some good relations with Russia. So ASEAN can be for Russia one alternative pole or, you know, partner in Asia. But for, you know, other countries like a lot of important countries like Japan or South Korea, because they joined the sanctions, I think it would be difficult for Russia to diversify relations with these countries. India, of course, is another important partner for Russia. And so that's another option for them. But yes, we have to see, because there's a division of, everyone, you know, knows there's a division of labor between, in a sense, between Russian security presence, political presence in Central Asia and China having the economic presence. But we have to see how this develops, of course, in the future. Second, I think I touched upon your second question regarding Ukraine war. And yes, I think there's you can see the attempts to move away from Russia, but you know, as I said earlier, they cannot completely move away, because for Kazakhstan, for example, is the obvious example. They have a very, very long border. President Tokayev just visited Russia, met with Putin as his first foreign overseas visit since he was re-elected as president. So you can see that in the symbolism that Russia is still the important partner for Kazakhstan. Some other countries like Uzbekistan, which has no border with either China or Russia, so they have some more flexibility, I would say, so they can pursue a more multi-vector foreign policy. So it varies according to the geopolitical location and the circumstances of each Central Asian state. But yes, I agree that I think there's a lot of fear and concern after Russia's actions in Ukraine about what would happen to them in Central Asia. And yes, third question, very interesting. I think it's possible. I think the norms, you know, Central Asian states, they have the agency. You know, if you look at, there's a lot of talk, you know, when you look at Central Asian works on Central Asia, there's, you know, always a great game, you know, big power politics and all that. And, you know, people tend to overlook the role of Central Asian states themselves. And that is why I try to look at the Central Asian perspective in my book as much as I can, and to see that, you know, to try to say that they have their own thinking, and, you know, they have their own response, or they have their own initiatives that they, you know, respond to the great power politics or dynamics. And I truly believe that they are in a position to shape their own rules and norms. And I don't think that such rules and norms would be that different from ASEAN's or SCOs at the moment, because, you know, all this, you know, the sovereignty is very important for these countries, for every country actually. And, you know, non-interference in domestic affairs, is important. And, consensus decision making, I think, is good in the sense that, all states are equal. So they have an equal say, and no one has, there's no voting, and there's, I think it's going to be very complicated. So, yeah, I think they are in a position to shape the rules and norms, but there's still some problems. I think Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, as I mentioned in the book, they're coming more towards each other, which is a good sign. They're cooperating with each other more. They are the two leading players in the region, and it's a good sign that they're cooperating. But you still have some problems with Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan regarding the borders. And I think at the latest summit, they had this declaration or something, and I think Turkmenistan and I think Tajikistan, if I remember correctly, didn't join. So there's some issues remaining, but I think it's a good sign, particularly regarding the two main powers main countries in the region who are now cooperating even more. Thank you.
Okay, 10 minutes remains. If there is someone in the audience have a question or comment, raise your hand and write QA. We just have 10 minutes, so now the floor is open. So I have just methodological questions. Paradorn, you are diplomat and academics. Sometimes it's not so consistent. Today's your theory is like your life between practitioners and academics, because usually term of hedge is a kind of neo-realist term, but you also use hedging regionalism. It's a kind of a different approach. So I'm very interested in your kind of combination in a kind of realist and also the institutionalist. So you are a diplomat. Do you really believe such kind of a regionalism idea? I think that even in Southeast Asian countries, so varieties, you partly mentioned Myanmar. Myanmar is now strongly backed by Russia, particularly military sense. Laos, it's a kind of front of China's advancement toward Southeast Asia. Probably it's a neighbors for Thailand. So would you have some hedge for your survival? This is my question.
Thank you, Yoshida-sensei. A very tough question. Yes, I mean, I try to combine both practitioner perspective in my book, in my research, practitioner's experience and perspective, but I grounded it in some academic, theories. And the reason I chose hedging, because I truly believe from being in the region that we share similarities, Southeast Asian countries and Central Asian countries. Not everything is exactly the same, of course, but I think we share similarities that we can learn and engage with each other. And so in terms of what label or what hat I'm wearing as a theorist, I'm to be honest, I'm not sure. I think I'm from the British school that, we combine all elements of analysis, all layers, to try to make it as rich as possible. So we don't, I think the US school is more rigid in terms of, IR theory, that you have to be like this. But I think my training is from Britain, and it's more, flexible in that respect. So we have different layers of analysis. Yes, well, I think I answered your question, I hope.
Yeah, factually, as yes.
Sorry.
Please.
Sorry, I forgot about ASEAN and regionalism. Yes, as I said, it's facing some uncertainty, and it's a big issue now amongst ASEAN countries. China's role has there's different perspectives towards China, and as you said, Laos, some countries may be more leaning towards China, more susceptible to Chinese influence, but some countries are going the other direction. And in a sense, we still need to engage with China because it's a big neighbor, it's an economic powerhouse in the region. But you know, like it varies. Because I think one Southeast Asian scholar like, you know, characterize the different Southeast Asian countries' response to China and US in terms of hedging. Like you have the heavy hedges, which, you know, are, you know, very concerned regarding China, but then they're not actually, you know, aligning themselves with the US, you know, the hedging, but they're heavy hedges. And then you have the other side, the light hedges, maybe something like Laos or maybe Myanmar nowadays, I'm not sure. But so there's a lot of differences and nuances. And I think this is an area which deserves to be studied. And you know, the same logic, the same thinking can be applied to Central Asia. I also mentioned this briefly, that, you know, some countries may be more, you know, susceptible to Chinese influence because like Kyrgyz Republic, perhaps it's a small country, a lot of Chinese investment. But then you also see a lot of backlash, public opinion, which is against China's economic role. Uzbekistan is in a much better position because no borders with either Russia or China, so they have more flexibility. It's becoming stronger as economically more developed. So I think it's interesting to see how they develop their foreign policy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. I wish you keep your two orientations, but mix. I think that your academic work have an impact on your diplomatic career, I hope.
I hope so too. Thank you very much, Yoshida-san.
So thank you so much, all of the participants. So please show up the commentators, Uyama-san and Kato-san. This is a time to the kind of a screenshot. Probably now in someone will wrap up. So thank you so much. Today it's a kind of a new axis between Japan and Thailand toward Central Asia. Thank you, Uyama-san and Kato-san.
Thank you so much. Arigatou gozaimasu.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
So see you next year. Thank you so much.
Happy New Year.